Welcome to Think Big with Dan and Qasim. Join hosts Dan Melnick and Qasim Masood as they explore big ideas, limitless possibilities, and engage with visionaries, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders who dare to dream big, get inspired, motivated, and find practical tips for personal growth. Think big, dream bigger, and ignite your potential.
Welcome to Think Big with Dan and Qasim. Our guest today is Jasper Fu. So Jasper, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, tell us where you live and what you do.
Sure. Thanks, Dan. Thanks for having me on. So my name is Jasper, currently in Greenville, South Carolina. Moved up from Naples earlier this year, just to be a little bit closer to parents in between conferences. I am the CEO of CoinSub. And what we do is we enable stablecoin and crypto acceptance as an alternative payment method at checkout for pretty much anyone, right? You don't really have to be familiar with crypto. You don't have to be really familiar with blockchain. It's just one more net new payment method. And then it goes to your bank account if you want, just like anything else. We also enable other payment service providers and fintechs to basically white label our products so that they can push it out to their network. There's a couple of other projects I've got my hands in kind of the intersection of the blockchain space, but that's kind of the core focus.
Awesome. So I'm just curious about your background. How did you get into starting this company?
Yeah, so I've always been in kind of the emerging technology space. Believe it or not, in the early 2000s, early 2010s, even the concept of cloud or like digital storage was emerging technology. So really first couple years of my career were with PricewaterhouseCoopers when everyone was transitioning from hardware systems, like ERP systems, to enterprise-wide like cloud storage. And so we were working on like a lot of these transitory systems for Fortune 50s. And over that, I kind of got a sense of how do large companies adopt new technology. And then on the side, I had always been part of like the crypto side of things, using it to buy things online, mostly legal things. And so I've been in crypto since about 2012, mostly as a hobbyist, as an investor, occasionally built some projects here and there. But at some point in the past couple of years, the hobby and profession side came together, and I kind of observed that blockchain was going through a lot of the same adoption trends as cloud tech did. By that time, had a really great technical team, great network that I was working with already. And so a couple of us just split off of our existing projects to build out essentially this next wave of enterprise tech change.
So in terms of your ideal customers, who do you guys typically work with, and where do you see the most value for CoinSub?
Yeah, so the ideal customer for us, especially as a startup, is someone that already has a large merchant network. Our role is tech innovation and building the enterprise solution. There's plenty of large companies out there that already provide payments, Stripe, Square, Adyen, even banks that provide payment processing or merchant acquiring that have thousands, hundreds of thousands, and even millions of merchants that they're already providing payment acceptance services to. So the happy middle ground there is we build the tech, we make it turnkey. This is our specialty and focus. And they go ahead and distribute the tech, mark it up, make a high margin on it, just like how payments traditionally works. And this way, their focus and strength is the distribution piece, and our focus is the technology piece.
Makes sense. So obviously there's many other providers that do crypto payments. So how does CoinSub differ from what's already in the market?
Yeah, so you would call us probably late comers, but the interesting piece is that a lot of tech has changed over the past, say, 10, 12 years, especially as far as blockchain technology goes, to enable us to build things that were not available, say, even 3, 4, 5 years ago. So wallets have become a lot easier, access to exchanges has become a lot easier, and then kind of the smart contract technology has also become a lot more accessible. So what this means is rather than you giving me this obscure address and me trying to send it to you and hoping that it gets there and sending a test transaction, things like that, the way that we have it built works like you would expect from any other checkout, right? You go, you see this option, you click it, you connect your wallet, and then there's no room for user error. You can start to finish 30 seconds to a minute. And this for us, as well as the way that we focus around the merchants and making sure that this works alongside everything they have, just is how we reach like the 99% of people that don't know and don't care about blockchain or just happen to have it have crypto in hand. And for merchants who just want to get new customers that they otherwise might not have been able to reach. So our focus is not around the technology so much when we go to market as really making sure that it works out of the box for everyone involved. We like to measure it so easy that grandma could do it. So that's kind of our focus there. But from a more technical perspective, we're the only ones that really offer scalable subscriptions, which as easy as it might sound, it actually takes a lot of additional infrastructure to make sure it works, right? It's not just sending someone money every 30 days. It's what happens if someone runs out of money? What happens if they need a free trial? And then it's all that other logic that actually makes it viable for commerce. And then the second one is we're built from day one to be white labeled and for someone else's brand to be on our infrastructure. And so we're built for technical advantage and then distribution. Kind of our distribution hijacks the existing payment systems.
For sure. So when somebody subscribes and is using your platform, which is like any e-commerce or commerce site, is like a standard reauthorization within a few days. Like, what does that look like in terms of, if the payment declines, for example?
Yeah. So the only reason the payment would decline is if they had insufficient funds, right? And so, say it's day 30 or the first of the month and their rebill is due, we attempt to rebill. Of course, if they have enough money, then it transfers to their merchant's wallet. Easy enough. They get a webhook that says this is successful. All else is good, right? Now, in all the other cases, if not, there's an error code. Generally, it's just going to be insufficient funds. There's one catch-all for just error or failure. And then the merchant receives a webhook that says, hey, this rebill attempt failed because of error code. Now, we'll continually rebill on a daily basis until they tell us not to, which is a little something different than you can usually do with cards. Because for us, it's far more efficient to do it. They don't have to manage that. And at any point, they know how many days it's been, how many days overdue someone's been, and they can choose to programmatically or manually cancel their subscription.
For sure. And then I guess, obviously, when it comes to billing and collecting payments within the blockchain space, obviously internationally, right, you have a lot more people using it, especially because, in many countries, developing countries, their currency is not as stable. So are you seeing more customers come internationally, like outside of the US?
Yeah. So for certain software-based products, physical shipping, physical, we're kind of limited by shipping, or the merchants are limited by shipping. But for software-based products, imagine people don't think about how many payment methods are out there, right? We live in the US, we go, okay, there's credit card, there's PayPal, there's Cash App, without necessarily, and however many more, right? Without necessarily thinking that there might be dozens of similar ones on a global scale that we actually can't access, which really for merchants and businesses that can target globally, they're missing out on essentially the rest of the global audience. And so we've seen a lot of adoption in Latin America, particularly areas with high inflation, where the US dollar is just saying, compared to their local currencies, about 40% inflation on an annual basis, which means by having stablecoin and exposure to the US dollar, it's actually a means of kind of hedging against inflation for these businesses and the individuals. And then a lot of just simple cross-border things, right? If someone's trying to, us, for example, right? We have contractors and employees in Turkey, Greece, Serbia, and bar none, the easiest way to pay them is through our own system. And of course, there's local banking relationships so that you can take that stablecoin and crypto into your local currency.
And then I guess in terms of, obviously now Q4 is around the corner. What are you guys most focused on as we're entering Q4?
Actually, a peer-to-peer app. So we realized at this point, most of the businesses knew nothing about crypto, nor do they want to, which means they don't come in having wallets. So we deployed wallets for every single merchant, just tied to their email with passkey, biometric, OTP, things like that. So kind of demystifying this whole blockchain piece for them. And then at some point on the checkout side, we realized that not everyone's got a wallet that they can connect. Sometimes the exchanges won't connect, or even as things grow, they might have like a hardware wallet, right? So we realized, hey, somebody might just want a wallet they just use for spending, right? You don't always take your entire checking account or savings account and go out and spend it. You usually take a little bit of cash. And so we realized then that we've created a wallet that works with across networks, that has the ability to bring different currencies in and then withdraw to different currencies. That's just tied to someone's wallet and their biometrics if they so choose to set it up. And just kind of observe that it solved a lot of C2C or peer-to-peer issues in both global remittances, but also just local payments where people are unbanked. And for us, that solves a little bit of the chicken and the egg, right? A lot of times the merchant's biggest concern is how many people are actually going to use this? How many people actually have crypto? And by actually going to the consumer application side of things and deploying the same infrastructure that'll work with the merchants, we can actually give them a solid answer of, hey, we have X many captive, there's this much spending power that'll work directly with these merchants. And it even gives us an opportunity down the road to create a little marketplace so we can direct basically customer acquisition to the merchants based on their interests.
For sure. And I guess what are you seeing in terms of this, like the overall user adoption for crypto? Because obviously it's going up year over year, but in terms of just, percentage of people that are using it, I think it is still, you kind of just spoke about earlier, for like a lot of people who are older, maybe just a challenge and they're just don't understand it, right? So how do you kind of like go and get that adoption for folks?
So a lot of people, well, first, what am I seeing is this year has been big, particularly in the US, in like the past year or two, been really big for enterprise, government, business adoption. There has been enough interest in it and enough adoption from the consumer side that it's kind of this unignorable topic. But consumer adoption of late has not really made a jump forward. Most of the usage you end up seeing in, so say as an exchange, right? Coinbase, Binance, Kraken, things like that, where they're mostly using it as a vehicle for investment rather than a vehicle for day-to-day commercial activity. I think part of that is because that gap of experience is not bridged yet. It's not easy to go spend it somewhere. It's a lot of additional hoops. So there's no good reason to do so. But adoption, I think in the US, it's somewhere between like 10 and 20% of people have some form of crypto for like adult age. And then depending on different regions of the world, that number drastically changes. But I still think a lot of that money is inaccessible from a commerce perspective. People are working on B2B because it's relatively easy. I can always invoice you if you send it, or if you don't, I can always email you. But when you start doing B2C, you need actual scalable solutions that can handle 1,000, 100,000. And manual conversation doesn't actually work. So adoption-wise, a lot of B2B, a lot of kind of interest in policy, consumer application side of things, more so still stuck around speculation, investment vehicle, meme coins.
For sure, yeah. I mean, I think a lot of people are still very hesitant and concerned about it. So I guess if you could go back in time to before you started this business, what is the one biggest piece of advice that you wish you knew?
That's a really good question. And the first thing that jumps out to me is you're probably not going to be working on the things you think you're working on. We did raise a couple million a while back, but I realized a lot more as we get into this space. Brand recognition, having marquee clients, who are your investors, working around compliance, things like that, occupy a lot more of my time than even the building and the business development piece. Those are actually the easy ones. It's mostly just mundane things, somewhat playing politics, staying on top of, global movements and like narratives. So the piece of advice is don't interrupt your yoga routine for this.
That's good advice. So like if somebody's watching this show and if they wanted to use CoinSub or wanted to reach out to you, do you mind sharing your website or social media, I guess, best ways to get in contact?
Yeah, best way would probably be just to find me on LinkedIn if you're interested, and I'll direct you to the right person. Otherwise, you can look up CoinSub and we pop up on LinkedIn. But LinkedIn is generally our avenue of conversation rather than Twitter or something else.
Well, Jasper, thanks so much for your time today.
Thanks, Dan.